Don't believe that you need to be afraid. Don't believe you are totally depraved. Don't believe you are a worm of the dust. Don't believe you love evil more than good. Don't believe in a personal devil outside thyself. Don't believe in a heaven that is up in the sky. It is within.
Religious cults. What springs to mind? The 3 decades in particular between 1970 and 1990 seem to have spawned a fair few notable and notorious ones. Any such subject tends to involve a megalomaniac leader and a truth only he possesses. We don't really think of a religious cult in the midst of Victorian New Zealand society a century prior though, and that's what happened here in this story. Let's begin at the beginning of this one with an American immigrant called Arthur Worthington. Look at his time in his home country before he made it to New Zealand. He was born Oakley Crawford in New York in 1847, but somewhere along the track added Samuel in the front of this. Served in the Civil War, then studied law and became a lawyer, a real estate investor, banker, mining speculator, to name but a few short-lived jobs, never staying in one spot for any length. In 1868 he was caught defrauding a business in Detroit and jailed. After getting released he moved to Chicago, got married, left her in the lurch and scarpered. This, by the way, was the only legal marriage he undertook of the 9. Ditto Occurrence, married and run in Ohio. Ditto Texas. Ditto Toronto. The chicks loved the debonair and handsome Worthington. Ditto California. You may by now be recognising a behavioural pattern somewhere here emerging. Ditto Wisconsin and ditto South Dakota. Somewhere in between all that and his bigamous tour of the United States, he also got time to join the Church of the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, defrauding them of $1,000 and completely out of character, marrying in Utah, then almost immediately flying the coop. Next thing, he shacked up with a rich spinster in Boston, bled her dry before deciding on a new career path, one with tax benefits and a malleable client base. He became a Methodist minister, which lasted like ice on the desert sands. It was while he was calling himself Arthur Bentley Worthington that he joined the embryotic Christian Scientist Church, dabbling in faith healing. The publishers of that church's newspaper were a couple called John and Mary Plunkett. Soon he was bedding Mrs. Plunkett, who saw herself as the high priestess of Christian Science. He also had Pinkerton's detective agency sniffing around on behalf of some of the exes, in particular the 3 with whom he had had children. Those were the days you could go into the slammer for not paying child support. John Plunkett was first okay being cuckolded by Worthington, then that menage a trois turned rather sour. With the PI sniffing around and an angry husband wanting him out of the house and the church, he decided it was time to scarper west. Really, really west. New Zealand. That's where he headed in 1890 with Mary Plunkett and her 2 children in tow, along with most of John's wealth, which came in useful in the initial stages setting up a hybrid Christian Scientist church in Christchurch. To supplement their income, Arthur moonlighted as a children's magician called the Wizard of the Southwest. They settled on a name of their new church as well. They called it the Students of Truth. Plunkett, the self-professed high priestess, and Worthington, the high priest. Worthington then began with lectures to test the market. What, pray tell, were they prophetising in amongst the predominantly Church of England Cantabrians? Pantheism, New Age Christianity to coin a modern term, metaphysics, and because Worthington was a notorious rooter, free love. Hippies way before their time. They were on the scene long before Napoleon Hill, Deepak Chopra and books like The Secret spruik gullible people into believing the power of the mind can make you money or find you a new partner simply by thinking about it. Take disease and illness, for example. This is what they had to say.
Disease is the visible expression or picture of sin in a disordered mind reaping the one of ease. Sickness, poverty, discord, sin and suffering of any sort are nothing but the result of false beliefs.
For the record, Mr. and Mrs. Worthington were prophetising the law of attraction at the beginning of the 1890s. Within 2 years they had enough followers to build a magnificent church in the centre of Christchurch, the Temple of Truth. Let's see, outside and the inside. The impressive structure was large enough to hold meetings of up to 1,500 people and existed on the site in Latimer Square until 1966. Beside the temple, here in this photo, you'll spot the 12-room residence of the Worthingtons. A Sunday school come kindergarten, a social hall was also part of the structure. The buildings were partly funded by the Plunkett's wealth, a small part, debentures issued amongst the more ardent followers, and more worryingly, a very large mortgage. 4 years later, the Temple of Truth properties would be put into liquidation. That demise is best summed up in one word: sexological, a word/term Worthington invented in order to give some credence to the church's teachings. Not to mention the church's practices. Tell them what some of those practices were, Paul. We all like a bit of rumpy-pumpy. Well, he held private sex therapy sessions for couples, the ones without a Kama Sutra in their libraries. And also the kindly Arthur would also undertake freebie sessions, one-on-one, with the parishioners' wives. Organise a group session with parishioners so they could put into practice what they had all learnt. All naked in the same room of his mansion. Mrs. Worthington never dressed for that occasion either. Not everyone in conservative old Christchurch was happy with this new religion in town, namely the stale ministers Worthington talked about as being Japanese praying mantises. In particular, this free love and mumbo-jumbo business didn't go down with a Methodist minister called John Hosking. He took it upon himself to undertake his own investigations into the charming Mr. Worthington, and who did he contact to get the oil? None other than Pinkertons, who were only too pleased to drop the dirt on him, and even supplied a North American wanted poster, exactly as the ones depicted in Western movies, and I've run up a bit of an example here. The Reverend John Hoskins soon made it sure these posters or replicas appeared all about Christchurch, and the authorities were soon pressured into reviewing Worthington's immigration status, Worthington's shady past having come to light. Only when it came down to getting him actually deported, they discovered this was one citizen the United States didn't want back. New Zealand was stuck with him in the meantime. The Salvation Army in Christchurch began earnestly praying for his expulsion. His detractors weren't holding back. The press, meanwhile, had a field day. Surely a scandal of this magnitude put a dent in the students of truth's credibility. I mean, it was established that Mrs. Worthington was not even married to Mr. Worthington. The goings-on, which should have been goings-off, were laid bare, like those rolling around on his carpet. Nope. The controversy soon blew over. Attendances were still in the range of 700. Remember I told you a Sexological was the portent for Worthington's demise? Whilst this was all happening, Mary Plunkett had an epiphany. She began preaching a different version of Christian Science, much to the dismay of the memfolk of the Temple of Truth, including in particular Worthington himself. Plunkett now wanted all the female parishioners to become celibate. This major turn in doctrine caused a schism in the membership. Mary, now calling herself Sister Magdala, went off and formed her own church cum religion called the School of Mental Science. It failed miserably and she became destitute and travelled to Australia for a spell, returned to Christchurch, and in 1901 she married a local dentist called John Atkinson. A few months into the marriage she committed suicide in the most bizarre circumstances, drowning herself in the garden fountain cum pond. Immediately after that messy divorce cum split in the church, an embittered Plunkett had launched attack after attack on her ex in the local rags. She backed up what Hoskins had established and laid bare and doubled down. The deck of cards were beginning to tumble. Membership now plummeted and the flock began to leave. The mortgage wasn't getting paid, and Plunkett's money had naturally all dried up. As his empire crumbled around him, Worthington did what he did best. Ignoring protests from what was left of his flock that this wasn't a good idea, in August 1895 he got married to an 18-year-old parishioner. Half the country by now already knew he was a serial bigamist. Her horrified parents promptly extracted her from that brief wedlock. Undeterred, he had another crack in December, only 4 months later. By then the main church itself was in possession of the bank, and that austere union took place in a registry office. The lucky lady, number 9, was Evelyn Maud Jordan, and they would go on to have 4 children. Not even marriage number 9 was going to save the now 48-year-old. Promising he would buy the church and pay off all his creditors with the money he had back in the US, he up and left, Evelyn in tow. Only instead of going east, he went southwest and ended up in Tasmania. When it was found out he was attempting to start a church there, he was ousted by pissed-off members and non-members back in Christchurch. 18 months after scarpering to Australia under a cloud, he nonchalantly appeared back in Christchurch. It was now 1897 and the Christchurch public had turned dark on Mr. Worthington. Creditors were aplenty. Debenture holders in the church building and the grounds looked for answers and some return on the investment. Trying to resurrect his career, the third public meeting he held at the Oddfellows Hall had to be broken up by the police, and Worthington escorted to safety as a crowd of 6,000 bayed for his blood. In Sydney, Australia was where he turned to next, and he went back to one of his original moduses, swindling lonely rich old ladies, mixed with a pinch of religion. Only now he was claiming to be the reincarnation of the Egyptian lord of the underworld and judge of the dead, Osiris. And he claimed his target, a rich spinster, was, in another life, Isis, the female Egyptian god of health, marriage and fertility. Only she wasn't having a bar of it. She told her lawyer about the scam, and he trotted off and told the cops, and Worthington ends up in the Melbourne jail doing 7 years. Nominal wife, number 9, meanwhile, heads back to New Zealand with Worthington's 4 children. Upon his release and deportation to the US, he did try to raise funds to reunite the family. Only that too was a scam. Most of the funds went into his pocket. Reclothed, he was now masquerading as a minister, this time a Presbyterian one that preyed on the congregation, rooted everything on 2 legs, stole funds and invariably got found out and then run out of town before being strung up by the bulls. His never-ending salacious lifestyle was seemingly never far from the headlines back in New Zealand. In the end, 1917, Worthington undertook one too many swindles stateside. He got caught and put inside and died in remand before he was tried. He was 70 and a confirmed conman to his dying breath. Now, if you want another video about a Kiwi cult involving a foreigner and preaching shamanism from an Auckland flat, which culminates in a rotting corpse lying on his lounge floor, hold your breath for this one. link below. With 38 million active channels on YouTube, thanks today for picking this one. Hope to spot you next time. Bye for now.